With a long and varied career spanning over half a century, David Bowie is one of the most interesting and unique musicians in pop history. When David Bowie albums are good, they're incredible. But are there any bad David Bowie albums? In this list, Dan and I will be rating Bowie's solo studio albums from A star to F, starting with his first album and ending with Blackstar. First on this list is 1967's David Bowie, featuring a young Bowie doing his best to impersonate Anthony Newley. The songs lack the energy and charisma of his later work. David Bowie is the only album that Bowie has tried to erase from his catalogue, declining to include it in his career-spanning Parlophone box sets. More of a curio than an essential, many of the songs were updated and improved for the currently unreleased Toy album recorded in the early 2000s.
See, I don't even consider the first David Bowie album a David Bowie album, it's a David Jones album. You know, apart from Laughing Gnome before it even came out, it doesn't really get good until a lot later on.
Featuring Bowie's first top 10 hit single, 1969's Space Oddity, which became his first UK number one when it was re-released in 1975, Space Oddity is the key moment of transition between David Bowie the mime artist and quirky pop singer to David Bowie the rock star. Despite being recorded a mere 2 years after his debut album, Space Oddity shows a newly found maturity to Bowie's songwriting. Highlights include the epic Memory of a Free Festival and the folky orchestral Wild Eyed Boy from Free Cloud.
In my opinion, Space Oddity is where it actually starts getting good.
This is not a bad album at all. The reason it places so low is that Bowie's input on this record is somewhat overstated. The majority of the songs were first recorded as jam sessions by Bowie's backing band, consisting of guitarist Mick Ronson, bassist and producer Tony Visconti, and drummer Woody Woodmansey, with vocals later added by Bowie. Visconti recalls Bowie being very uninterested and reluctant during the recording of this album, more preoccupied with his then new wife, Angie.
Don't forget as well, for The Man That Sold the World, it's got that weird alternative American release artwork with the cowboy, which I'd like to know more of a story behind that.
Full of songs that would later become classics, Hunky Dory was released to critical acclaim and a positive reception in the UK, but failed to chart in the US until after Bowie's death in 2016. Containing the songs Changes, Life on Mars and Oh You Pretty Things, Hunky Dory is a quintessential Bowie album.
Another great thing about Hunky Dory is that it teaches you how to pronounce Andy Warhol.
Perfecting the glam rock style, David Bowie catapulted himself into the mainstream with this 1972 album. Loosely based around the concept of an alien rock star visiting Earth to warn of the apocalypse, the album became a top 10 hit in the UK and just missed out on the US top 20.
I'm glad he killed off Ziggy Stardust, because I think other artists would have ended up like Pink Floyd, where they just remake The Wall every 5 years and do a tour. At least Bowie just was like, no, I'm putting Ziggy away, and then that's the end of it.
Often styled as a follow-up to the previous year's Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane expands on the concept of an alien rock star visiting Earth. Bowie himself dubbed the album Ziggy Goes to Hollywood, and the songs reflect a chaotic mixture of avant-garde jazz, proto-punk, cabaret, and the stunning ballad Lady Grinning Soul.
I think Aladdin Sane's a little bit overrated, but it's weird that it's the one album artwork that everybody has on a poster and puts on their fucking wall when they go to university and don't actually listen to David Bowie music.
Of course, the only David Bowie album not to contain any David Bowie songs has to score lower than most albums of his original works. What makes Pin-Ups compelling, however, are the performances and the overall sound of the LP. Recorded at the legendary Chateau d'Heureville, near Paris, and produced by Ken Scott, the album sounds fantastic despite the absence of original material.
Pin-Ups, for me, represents why artists should just do cover albums for themselves and not actually release them to the public. You want to record other people's songs for fun, fine. We don't have to listen to it as the general public. This ain't rock and roll, this is genocide!
When David Bowie set out to create Diamond Dogs, he intended to create a musical version of George Orwell's 1984. On failing to secure the rights from Orwell's widow, Bowie decided to make his own dystopian film about the post-apocalyptic mutants in Hunger City. While the film never went into production, Diamond Dogs is pretty much a soundtrack for this concept.
Kind of Ziggy Stardust Part 2, you know? Ziggy Stardust with more of a budget, that's what I feel it is.
Following the success of Diamond Dogs and Bowie's early 70s albums, Young Americans came as a shock as Bowie transformed from the glitter rock icon to a funky soul singer for this 1975 album. With a little help from John Lennon on the single Fame, Bowie scored his first and only US number one, finally breaking through to the rock mainstream.
Don't forget as well, Young Americans is also supposedly the invention of plastic soul, whatever the fuck that is.
With Station to Station, Bowie mixed the funk and soul of 1975's Young Americans with European krautrock influences to create a paranoid, drug-induced persona, the Thin White Duke. The album contains the single Golden Years, a song Bowie originally wrote for Elvis.
Station to Station also gets a shout out on the song Californication by Red Hot Chili Peppers, because it rhymes. No other reason. It doesn't make sense for anything else to do with that song.
If Space Oddity marked the moment that David Jones became David Bowie, and Ziggy Stardust the moment Bowie became a mainstream rock icon, Low is the moment he became an artist. Blending the experimental ambient work of Brian Eno, plus the new recording technology and techniques pioneered by long-term collaborator and producer Tony Visconti, Low went further than its follow-up Heroes in pushing the boundaries of rock music.
You might call these next 3 albums the Berlin Trilogy. I call them the Cocaine Trilogy.
Developing on the same template as Low, 1977's Heroes saw Bowie collaborate with Brian Eno and Tony Visconti again to produce another atmospheric and genre-defining album. This time, Bowie brought in King Crimson member Robert Fripp to lay down the experimental guitar work that dominates the first side of the record. Many of the solos that you hear were recorded in one take and consist of Fripp improvising over tracks that he'd never heard before, which is impressive to say the least. Next up is one of Bowie's most overlooked albums, 1979's Lodger. The last of the so-called Berlin trilogy that started with Low, Lodger sees Bowie take inspiration from Middle Eastern and African musical styles while experimenting with new songwriting structures. While the original album was plagued by poor mix which lacked clarity, the Bowie-endorsed 2017 Tony Visconti remix is the ultimate version of this release. Bowie began the 1980s with a nod to the new wave with this experimental art rock album. Considered by many to be Bowie's last great album, it became the benchmark that critics used to judge his releases for decades to come.
Yeah, well, there's a great interview from Bowie where he talks about how every album since Scary Monsters has been considered his return to form, and his response is, well, fuck the critics.
When Bowie walked into the studio to record Let's Dance with superstar producer Nile Rodgers, he allegedly had one request: give me a hit. After spending the 70s at his creative peak, Bowie, like so many artists at the time, wanted the money to go along with the fame, and Let's Dance, followed by the successful Sirius Moonlight World Tour, brought him international success and led to album sales of 10 million. Featuring intelligent pop and dance rock music, Bowie would later dismiss the period as his Phil Collins years, but without a doubt, Bowie would not have become such a recognisable worldwide icon without the success of this album. This might shock some fans, but we'd place Tonight lower than Never Let Me Down. This is mostly due to the fact Tonight is more of a covers album, with 7 of the 9 tracks featuring other songwriters. While songs like Tonight and Neighbourhood Threat worked well on Iggy Pop's Lust for Life, replacing the original's garage punk sound with big 1980s production just doesn't work.
I think Blue Jean from Tonight actually might be my favourite David Bowie video. He kind of does blackface, but it's more orange face, so I don't know if it's offensive or not. It's certainly not correct.
Never Let Me Down was a critical failure, but a commercial success. Suffering from over-the-top 1980s production and dated instrumentation, Bowie later deleted the track Too Dizzy from the CD and digital release of the album, and asked producer Mario J. McNulty to re-record the instrumentation when the album was reissued for the 2018 Loving the Alien box set. This new version proves that the material itself is strong and had potential.
I think Time Will Crawl might actually be the most underrated David Bowie song. Because it comes from Never Let Me Down, everyone just assumes that it's wank. But I kind of like the overproducedness of it. It sort of fits the mood.
Originally recorded as the background music to Bowie's wedding to supermodel Iman, 1993's Black Tie White Noise is a patchy album but important to the Bowie catalogue as it marks the end of the Tin Machine era and a return to Bowie as a solo artist. Highlights include the top 10 single Jump They Say, Miracle Goodnight, and a cover of Morrissey's I Know It's Gonna Happen Someday, featuring Spiders from Mars guitarist Mick Ronson. David Bowie once called The Buddha of Suburbia his favourite album of his own work, and it's not a bad album. It definitely features some of Bowie's best 90s songs, but the thing that lets down Buddha of Suburbia is its length and its inconsistency. The songs don't seem fully developed, and the lengthy instrumental tracks, The Mysteries and Ian Fish UK Air, break the flow of the album and seem like unnecessary throwbacks to the Berlin era, but without the groundbreaking impact of Low and Heroes. Perhaps Bowie's most ambitious concept album, 1995's Outside saw Bowie reunite with Brian Eno and a team of top musicians to record improvised jam sessions based on a short story Bowie had written about a dystopian future where the line between art and crime had been blurred. Initially rejected by the record label, Bowie edited the jams down to create more conventional songs, resulting in this epic 75-minute blend of industrial art rock.
If you listen to the outside outtakes as well, the banter in between the songs is actually better than the songs, so that's worth checking out.
The most out there Bowie album for decades, EARTHLING blended popular underground music genres such as industrial rock and drum and bass with his own pop sensibilities to create his most compelling album of the 90s.
The cover to EARTHLING has him wearing probably the coolest fucking jacket designed by Alexander McQueen, and also drum and bass is pretty fucking awesome, especially if it's Bowie doing it.
Next up is Hours, a laid-back and introspective album that sees a mature Bowie reflect on his career to date. Compared to Bowie's 90s albums, which are among his most ambitious and experimental, Hours shifts the focus to a more subtle sound. Coming after Outside and EARTHLING, this album seems like a step back, both creatively and artistically.
For the cover of Hours, is David Bowie killing Bowie, or is he saving Bowie from dying? I don't really know. Either way, he's touching Bowie in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable.
Recorded just prior to the September 11th attack on the World Trade Center, Heathen is an introspective and foreboding album that hints at growing global tensions. Featuring some of Bowie's best songwriting since the early 80s, Heathen was a return to form for Bowie, as well as marking the return of producer Tony Visconti, which explains the improvement in sound quality when compared to Hours.
I think Heathen is slightly underrated.
The final album released before Bowie's heart attack and 10-year hiatus, 2003's Reality was a strong follow-up to Heathen and featured the underrated singles Never Get Old and Nuclear Star, which failed to chart at the time of release but are among the best of his later catalogue. Recorded in secret and released after a 10-year hiatus, The Next Day catapulted Bowie back into the top of the music charts. While this album contains the fantastic singles The Stars Are Out Tonight, The Next Day and Where Are We Now, the album itself lacks focus, jumping from genre to genre as Bowie tries to revisit the sounds of his previous albums, a concept he would use to greater effect on Blackstar.
The Next Day's not too bad actually. I was kind of glad that he came back with that. Maybe a little bit underwhelming considering the time in between. Valentine's Day is in my opinion the best song.
Bowie's final album is certainly one of his best. With Blackstar, Bowie turned his own death into a work of art, redefining the comeback album, launching him back to the forefront of popular culture. Laced with references to his past career, as well as hints at his upcoming death, Blackstar was released to critical and commercial success mere 2 days before Bowie's death at the age of 69.
I think Blackstar is a nice full stop to his career, and quite a poignant thing to end on, particularly the song Lazarus.
So, how did we do? Let us know in the comments section what your favourite Bowie album is, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more music commentary.
I've got scars that can't be seen.